Introduce myself at the beginning, by the way. I'm Jeremy. I'm the pastor here, yeah, glad to have you here. We haven't met before. I wasn't here last week, so some of you came last week, and I look forward to getting to meet you on the way out, if I haven't already. But I have mentioned over the last couple months, a couple times, that I was going back to school in the fall. But I've never really explained this or shared details. And so before we get into the sermon, I thought I might do a bit of show and tell, if that's all right, just to kind of explain to you what I mean by that, so that you can just kind of know what's going on in my life and be a part of this journey with me in some ways. So, is that all right with you guys? Good, because that's what I'm going to do. So, always so funny when a speaker who's clearly planned something asks if that's okay. So I'm enrolled in a PhD in Theological Studies program at Wycliffe College at U of T, University of Toronto, in their downtown campus. So that's the college there. It's a beautiful old building established 100 years before I was born. And it's just fantastic. I got a couple pictures inside, so it reminds me of Hogwarts when I'm in it. Let's see that next picture, the inside one. So that's one of the rooms that we met in. I think that might have used to be the library. I'm not sure. Now it's just a big room that I just sat and went, wow, this is a lot nicer than the fluorescent lights and drop ceiling of the last school I went to. So anyway, it's fantastic. Last week, or the first week I was there, they were actually using the building to film a movie. And so you can see it in the next picture here. Oh, yeah, that picture there. They've got it all draped off. This is my dorm room, by the way. I stayed overnight, and I, as a 41-year-old man, am back to sleeping in a dorm room. So there you go. That's not quite as Hogwarts-like there. But this is the film set of the sequel to the movie It that they were filming right at the college the first week we were there. So anyway, apparently other people think the building looks interesting as well. So Wycliffe is an evangelical Anglican school. And so for those of you from an Anglican background, you're thinking, finally, Jeremy will get it. And it's part of what's called the Toronto School of Theology, which is 7 different seminaries at U of T, plus a few other organizations who've joined together to kind of offer courses together, to offer their degrees together. And so as I'm there, I get to be exposed to both teachers and students from many other backgrounds. And I met people from all kinds of different backgrounds at Wycliffe: Baptist and Presbyterian and CMA and Pentecostal and Anglican and Catholic, all kinds of different backgrounds. And the teachers and the profs, too, will be from a bunch of different backgrounds. And so there's such a wide variety of people and backgrounds that it just actually reminds me of MCC on a Sunday morning. So if you look around here, you have that kind of group, too, from all kinds of different Christian backgrounds. This is me with my cohort class at the Toronto School of Theology. You can see me there in like the 3rd row, smiling away, in the same shirt I have on now, coincidentally. So those are, some of the people, and they're from all over the world, too. So it's really fantastic to kind of have that breadth. So last couple weeks for me have been a lot of fun. It's been, the first week was orientation. This past week we were my first week of classes. I like Wycliffe. I like its emphasis on Scripture. I like its emphasis on prayer, though prayer is done by the book, if you will, at Wycliffe. So there's a service in the morning and a service in the afternoon every day of the week, and they have Eucharist on Wednesday. It's for those of you who wished I was more Anglican, I'm on my way. There's also a big emphasis on community and relationships. So it's not just go in and study and go home, but get connected. And so for that reason, last weekend, my family and I went to participate in their annual retreat with staff and students at a camp down near Orangeville. And so we had a good time getting to know people, and my family got to come into this new world that I'm entering. And so that's why I wasn't here, and Brad spoke for me last year. My favorite picture from that fun weekend was Ella in a grass fight with the principal of the college, which is the president, Bishop Stephen Andrews, who used to be bishop of our area, actually, and so is quite familiar with Huntsville and Muskoka, and very nice guy. And I looked over, and Ella was carrying a bale of lawn clippings and attacking him with it. And I was thinking, I'm going to get expelled before I even start classes. But people there are fantastic. The other thing I like besides the people are the libraries. So this is one of the 7 theological libraries, and I was kind of at heaven, you're in heaven there. And then this one here, the next one, that's the U of T's library. There's like 14 floors, and it's like the 3rd largest library system in North America. And if you know me, you know that my best friends and favorite people are books. So you just know how delighted I am in all these books. So let's talk a little bit about the course of study. It involves 3 semesters of coursework. So I'll have to go down and actually take classes in Toronto for 3 semesters. About a year and a half I'll be done that part of things. That's not that different from my MA that I took a couple of years ago, but at the beginning, that's kind of the intensive part where I'm taking classes, then I have to do comprehensive exams, and I have to spend a few years writing a dissertation. And so it's gonna be a 4 to 5 year experience if I'm lucky. With the intense part being right now. So this semester I have to go down on Tuesday and I'll come back on Wednesday. And you might think, well, will that affect your role as pastor here at MCC? And I would say yes, to some extent. Me taking these classes will affect some of my availability here. And that is why we're working so hard to get an associate pastor in place by fall, which didn't quite work out, but we'll have some news about that soon because that's moving in a good direction at this point. But the truth is I do a lot of my work by phone and by email, so some of you will not even notice that I'm gone or that there's any difference in the schedule. But the truth is that this will be some extra work, and what we decided is we're going to take the next 3 months, 1 semester, to see how it works and to figure it out and then reevaluate. So I'm kind of just asking for your patience, letting you know this is going on, and if there are times when I may not be as available or I have to put you off till next week or something like that, please know that that's not because I don't care, but there's a lot going on. On the other side of that, here's what I don't want to happen. I don't want you to hear me say this morning, if Jeremy is busy, I shouldn't contact him. Because the truth is, the things that are most important to me in my ministry, and the reason that I'm going to school, is because I like working with people. And I like working with you guys and helping you grow. And when you're in crisis or you need some help or you have questions, I like to be there with you. And occasionally when I get busy, I hear people say, well, I was going to contact you, but I didn't because I know you're so busy. Listen, I'm never too busy to be contacted. So please, even as I'm in school and even as things are a little more intense, don't hesitate to reach out to me. If I can't meet with you that day or that week, I will let you know. And that's what I'm asking for from you. But what I'm asking, the other thing I'm asking from you is just continue to relate to me as your pastor and never assume that I don't have time for you. Okay? Does that sound good? Okay. So, that's the end of my show and tell. By the way, all of this in my mind is part of my following Jesus. I feel like God's led me to this place. Now I'm praying through what he has for me to study, because in a PhD you really, drill down into one topic, and I thought I had that figured out, and over the last 6 weeks God has sort of shaken me and said, I don't want you to go that way. I got something else. I'm like, okay, tell me what then? And so if you'd like to pray for me, pray that I can figure that out as quickly as possible, that God speaks to me and that I hear clearly, and that this is a time that energizes me, which reminds me of the other thing I wanted to say, that even though this might draw away some time, this kind of thing is the kind of thing that energizes me. And so I fully expect that my time down there will allow me to come back and minister here in a way that's sharper and more energized and creative, because these are the things that kind of fill my bucket. And so I think that we will all benefit from this. Anyway, I'm going to figure it out one step at a time. That's how we follow Jesus, kind of one step at a time in our lives. He has a very personal journey for us. And that is actually, to segue into the sermon, what we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks. We've been talking about what we call discipleship. And that word discipleship simply refers to the fact that we believe that 2,000 years after Jesus walked the earth and had his own little group of disciples, he still calls us to be disciples, to be followers, that we model our lives after his. And so we've been talking about that for a couple weeks, and we'll talk about it for a couple weeks more. The first week, we kind of asked ourselves to be honest about whether we really were disciples or just part of the kind of crowd around Jesus, intrigued by him, interested in him, watching him, but not necessarily devoted to him or following him. Last week, Brad talked about the importance of discipline in our discipleship. That discipline and disciple are actually kind of the same word, and the two go together. You can't be a disciple without having some disciplines in your life, some things that you're actively doing to help develop that discipleship. And today, I want to talk about how discipleship, how following Jesus is both the easiest and the hardest thing that you will ever do. Does this make sense to you intuitively when I say that? If you're a disciple, both the easiest and the hardest thing you'll ever do. Before we get into that, I want to remind you what a disciple is, in case you weren't here that first week where we kind of gave some background. Disciples in Jesus' day, in the New Testament, the first century, were followers of religious teachers called rabbis. Those rabbis would invite the best of the religious students to come follow them. And those students would literally leave behind everything they had and were, their families, their jobs, and they would 24/7 follow these rabbis around in order to learn from them, not an academic discipline like what I'm learning, but an entire way of life. And so a disciple was a follower of a particular rabbi, not library, who followed them day and night to learn their way of living. Now this had to do with a couple things, and it was called their yoke. So a disciple would take upon them the yoke of a particular rabbi, which was their interpretation of the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, or the law of Moses that the Jews lived by. Because just like today, sometimes scriptures can be confusing. So each rabbi kind of had their particular take or their way of living out this law of Moses for worship, for everyday living, kosher eating, all that sort of stuff. And so in order to learn, you had to be with them all the time. And so, did that green light just happen? Okay. So if there's a way to turn the green light off, I went back there, actually turned the green light off earlier and thought I had. So it was the lower set bank of lights before, Jason. There was one up. Are they all down now? All down. Yeah. Okay. It's either the far left or far right control. Probably the far right control. Maybe if you slide it up and down. Or I can speak in green light. Green is for go forward in your life with Christ. So, also does something for my skin tone, I'm sure, too. So, did you see? Oh, okay, all right. Well, I wonder if you turn all the main lights down and then up again, if it'll remember that it's not supposed to be on. It forgot, so that's fine. It's fine. I'm going to have to start from the beginning. So, I've mentioned to some of you that I was going back to school. So you understand what it meant to be a disciple. The second thing I need to tell you about is sort of the religious climate of Judaism in that day. In that day, Judaism was kind of dominated by a sect within Judaism called the Pharisees. And the Pharisees were a little bit like the fundamentalists of that day. They were the ones that had a very strict view of the law, all these extra rules that people had. In fact, it was like they said, what's in here is not enough, actually, because we need to add some more rules on so that you can just make sure never to break any of these rules, okay? So they were kind of legalistic. They had all these rules and regulations. In fact, so many rules and regulations that a normal everyday person with a family and a job and a regular life couldn't possibly be expected to live up to all of them. So the Pharisees ended up being like professional religious people just so that they could keep all of their own rules. And Jesus doesn't have a lot of kind words about the Pharisees. In fact, one of the things he says in Matthew 23:4, he says, the Pharisees tie up heavy, cumbersome loads and put them on other people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. So Pharisees looked down on everybody else. They looked down on the normal people who couldn't live up to all their rules and said basically, you guys aren't committed to God, you're not godly, you're not righteous. And that's why, they even went so far as to say, that's why the Romans are occupying our land, because you people are so unrighteous. It kind of reminded me of when a hurricane struck a few years ago. I think it was Katrina, and fundamentalist or well-known leader guy, Pat Robertson, came on and said the reason that Katrina happened was because of the ungodliness of some people in America. So 2,000 years later, Pharisaism is still alive and well. And Jesus kind of came into that spiritual climate that was characterized by people who didn't feel like God liked them because they couldn't keep all the rules. And that normal, everyday people would have been, their lives would have been marked by a sense of failure and inadequacy and never being good enough. So in light of all that, I want to read the first of our scriptures this morning. I wonder if I go over here if it's less green. Found in Matthew chapter 11. And I just want you to keep all of that stuff in mind as I read this. Jesus says in Matthew 11:28, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." So first of all, I want to point out that this is an open invitation from Jesus. This is not just directed to a select few, the best of the best, the most religious. This was an invitation to the crowds to come to him. And do you recognize that language there? Take my yoke upon you. Become my disciple. It's an open invitation to discipleship. And this is one of the things that was very different about Jesus' ministry, is that he had an inner circle of 12 disciples. But it wasn't a closed circle. He didn't say, these are my disciples and my only disciples. He said, if you want to be my disciple, come to me. Take my yoke upon you. And the interesting thing was, there was no test to pass. You didn't have to have a certain amount of religious background or your PhD in theological studies. You just had to have a willing heart. That's why he invited fishermen and tax collectors and everyday normal people who didn't make the cut for the other rabbis to come and be his disciples. So he spoke directly to the people that the Pharisees looked down on, the ones that they heaped up the big heavy loads that they couldn't possibly carry. And he says, if you're tired of carrying that weight around, come to me and receive rest. He's saying, take my yoke upon you, which means take my interpretation of what God wants from you. Take my way of relating to God, my take on spirituality. Take that upon you. Learn my way of life, just like you would from another rabbi. Follow me. And his reasons for that, he doesn't say, take my yoke upon you because I'm the smartest and I'm the best and I have the best interpretation of Scripture and the most accurate, strictest. What he says is, take my yoke upon you because I'm gentle and I'm humble in heart. Now, gentleness was something that was prophesied about Jesus hundreds of years before he came. Isaiah 42:3 says, a bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out. So if you feel kind of beaten up by religious expectations that you feel like you can never live up to, Jesus is not going to break you. Just kind of like the woman caught in adultery, where he says, I don't condemn you. Go and sin no more. Jesus is going to respond gently to the ways that we're bruised, to the ways that we're struggling. He's not going to come in and break us. He's gentle. And if your faith is a little less like a flame and a little more like a candle that's just about to go out, flickering in the wind. He's not going to come in and blow that final breath. He's going to come in and cup his hands around your flame and let it grow again. Because Jesus is gentle. He's not harsh. He's not demanding. He's not judgmental. And not only is he gentle, he's humble in heart, it says. He comes as a servant. Even though he's the king, he puts himself under us to raise us up. He doesn't force himself in with shock and awe. He invites us with humility and grace. And so we can trust that when we come to him and accept his way of living, when we commit to becoming his disciples and following him and take his yoke upon us, that it's going to be something that it's not there to take advantage of us. It's not there to devalue us or abuse us in some way, because he's gentle and humble in heart. He can be trusted. In fact, it's in becoming his disciple, he says, and taking that yoke, that we're actually going to find the rest that our souls long for. He says, take my yoke upon you, learn from me, because I'm gentle and humble in heart, and then you're going to find rest for your souls. This restlessness that's inside of all of us, he says, it's going to settle down. You're going to find what you're longing for. Because, he says, the yoke that I have for you, it's easy. The burden is light. There's one translation that says that it fits perfectly. He knows exactly what we can handle and how we personally can follow him. I remember the first time I took April on a canoe trip into Algonquin Park. I was so excited. I'd gone on several. This was after we moved up here. And it was just such an exciting opportunity. And I packed 2 bags, a lighter bag with most of the food and cooking equipment, and then a big Algonquin Outfitters canoe pack. You've seen these things? You could fit like 2 small children in them. We didn't. We left our kids behind. But I filled that thing full of sleeping bags and whatever we needed. Probably my rock collection, D-cell batteries, whatever. And we were ready to go. And my plan was that she could carry the heavy pack, or one of us could carry the heavy pack, and then the other could carry the lighter pack and the canoe. Because I chose a route with a 2,500-meter portage for April's first experience. I learned that was not a good idea. Nonetheless, I want to bring you back to the picture of us canoeing or paddling down a lake, getting off at the first short portage, and her strapping on that big pack so that I could take the lighter pack in the canoe. And then I want you to picture her on a rock, unable to stand up, just like a turtle on its back. Like, My yoke was not easy, and my burden was not light. There was no way she could even stand up, let alone carry it. And maybe some of you feel that way about life, that God has packed this canoe pack full for you that you can't even stand up with. And you just wonder, well, why? Why have you done this to me, God? Like, why are you giving me such a heavy load to carry? And if we believe this invitation from Jesus, Jesus is not the one who gives us the heavy load. If you have a heavy load that you can't carry, perhaps that load is coming from somewhere else. And of course, what happened with April and I took the heavy pack and the canoe, which I'm such a muscular guy. It was fine. And she took the light pack, which still probably weighed 1,000 pounds. The point was, I was willing to trade her. And I think that this invitation from Jesus is a similar invitation. That he sees us laying on the ground there, waving our arms and legs like a turtle on its back, going, I can't carry all this. And he says, come to me. I'll trade packs with you. I've got one packed up for you that's going to be just what you can carry. It'll get tiring sometimes. It might be hard. But I'll take the heavy one. You take the light one. Now, it would be great to end the sermon there, wouldn't it? But remember what I said at the beginning, that this sermon is about the easy and the hard of discipleship. And so I want to read for you now, in light of all that, Luke 14. And you'll hear a different tone here, but it's the same Jesus saying it. So we're going to try to figure that one out. Luke 14, starting at verse 25. Large crowds were traveling with Jesus. There's those crowds again that are just there kind of curious. And turning to them, he said, if anyone comes to me, remember that invitation to come, and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. And whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. You see a little bit of dissonance between those two passages. Come and take a light load and an easy burden. Oh, by the way, it's a cross. Come and take my yoke upon you, which is easy and gentle and involves you hating everyone. So what is Jesus saying here? Why is there such a difference between those two passages? Why is the same Jesus who calls us to love our neighbors saying, but love your neighbor, but hate your wife and kids? So this seems kind of strange, doesn't it? And maybe you're thinking, well, actually I could tick off a couple of those boxes. I always kind of have hated my brother or sister. And, given how this week has gone, I have said I hate my life. So there, I'm good to be a disciple. So here's the deal. First of all, Jesus is using something called hyperbole here. And he does this a lot of times. He makes a very dramatic and strong statement in order to make a point. So in other places he says, if your eye causes you to sin, you should gouge it out, throw it away. He's not saying that literally. He's using hyperbole to make a point. Same with cutting your hand off if it causes you to sin. Same with when he said it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter the kingdom of heaven. He's making strong points that aren't literally to be taken literally in order to really get us to feel the force of what he's saying. And so he means something by this, but he doesn't literally mean that we need to hate all those things. So what is he asking, and why his tone so harsh here? Well, I think what he's saying is that if you're going to be his disciple, you have to be all in. His yoke, his way of life may be easy and light, but it's the only one that he's going to allow you to carry. You can't carry his yoke plus the yoke of society's expectations, plus the yoke of people's opinions in your life, plus the yoke of needing to have control and run your life your own way. If you're going to carry his light and easy yoke, then that needs to be it. No other yokes allowed. The only way, I think he's saying, that this discipleship thing is going to work is for you to be all in and for him to be the boss of you. So that's what he's trying to say. In fact, in another place he said, you can't serve two masters. You're either going to love one and hate the other, or hate one and love the other. They're always going to be in competition. And he said that about God and money, but it's true of the other things in our lives as well. That we can't serve God and other people's opinions. We can't serve God and success. We can't serve God and achievement. We can't serve God and material accumulation. That when there's competition in our lives, that doesn't work if we're going to worship God and serve him only. And in fact, here he's actually saying you can't serve God and family. So family is a really good thing, and God thinks very highly of it. But Jesus here is saying even your family needs to come below where he is in your life. Your discipleship has to be top priority. Your following him needs to be the number one thing in your life, and everything else gets arranged underneath of it. Now, in another place, he said, seek first the kingdom of God, and then all these other things will be added to you. In other words, you put him in top position, and that's going to beautifully affect the way you relate to your wife, children, father, mother, brothers, and sisters. You don't actually have to hate them, but that you can't be serving them as your first priority and be a disciple of him. You can't be serving yourself as your first priority and be his disciple. You can't serve two masters. Now, it's kind of like this. If you wanted to be a pro hockey player, and the coach said, anyone on this team, anyone who comes to this team, and they can't skate, and they can't handle the puck, and they can't pass, and they can't score, is not able to be a member of this hockey team. Except maybe if it was the Leafs. You knew that was coming, didn't you, Ann? You saw that one 100 miles away. The coach is not, in that case, trying to be mean. He's not saying, like, you're no good, you're not a good person. He's just saying you can't be a pro hockey player if you can't skate, pass, or stick handle. You're just not able to be. Come back to me when you're able to do all those things. And Jesus, that's what Jesus is saying about discipleship. Anyone who comes to me and has other loyalties that are going to compete for being my disciple is not able, is not ready yet to be my disciple, because discipleship is all in. It's a whole life thing. In the same way that those literal disciples in the first century left everything behind to follow in their rabbi's feet 24/7, to learn a way of life from that rabbi. We're invited into a similar relationship with Jesus where 24/7 we are following him. We don't get to do life our own way anymore. He becomes the top dog, the boss. And then Jesus wraps up this little statement by saying, oh, and also, if anyone comes to me and is not willing to carry a cross, you're also not ready to be a disciple. And what he's saying there is that sometimes we talk about like, oh, that's just their cross to bear, like a heavy burden like the pack I was talking about earlier. But that's not what Jesus is talking about at all. A cross is not a heavy burden to carry. A cross is a thing that you die on. That's what a cross is used for. And so when Jesus says to take up your cross and follow him, he's saying, oh, by the way, following me is going to involve dying. Because, that's the direction Jesus went. And he's saying that if you're going to come into this relationship of discipleship, you're going to have to die to your old self and your old way of life and allow him to bring to life a new you and a new way of living. Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, when Christ calls a man or a woman, he calls them to come and die. And unfortunately, Jesus didn't paint a picture of a quick and easy death. He painted a picture of a long, slow, painful process of dying to self, crucifixion, which will be the hardest thing we will ever do. So how do we reconcile the hard and the easy of discipleship? The invitation to come and take on this light and easy load and to carry our cross. At first, maybe it looks like Jesus is speaking out of both sides of his mouth, maybe doing kind of a bait and switch thing, like once you get in, then he tells you all the requirements. But I think, as I've reflected on it, both of these passages are just two sides of the same coin. Both are invitations to say goodbye to a previous way of doing life, to leave some things behind us. On the one hand, we need to leave them behind because discipleship will only work if we only have one master. But on the other hand, we need to leave them behind because those things, like our need to succeed or control or be in charge of our lives, those things actually turned out to be the heavy burden that we weren't able to carry on our own. The only way to lighten our load is to follow Jesus all in, 100%. The only way to take the lighter pack that Jesus wants to give us is to set down the big AO canoe pack that we've filled with all of our past baggage and everything else that we have in there, and to set it down and let him take it. So that's why discipleship is hard, but it's also easy. So I want to bring this home kind of into our lives today, because these are not passages that just said something to people back then. They're passages that continue to speak to us today as we consider what it means for us to be Jesus' disciple. So let's start with the easy. Where is it in your life that you feel weary and weighed down with a load that you can't carry? Or you could use some rest. Maybe you're carrying baggage from the past, unforgiveness, bitterness, disappointment with the way your life has turned out, regret for your mistakes, just baggage from the past that just weighs you down. Maybe you're trying to control everything in your life and your kids and your wife and family and your job, and you're just trying to keep all the plates spinning and you just don't think you can do it anymore. Or maybe you're facing obstacles in your life that are overwhelming and you have no idea how you're going to get past them. And they just weigh on you like a heavy load. Jesus' invitation is to come to him, to take that big backpack off and lay it at his feet and let him take it. And then to take on his easy, custom-fitted load that is just for you. But you can't do that. You can't do that if you're not willing to go all in following him. Because if you're not willing to go all in following him, take his yoke on you, then you're just going to go right back to carrying the things that you carried before. And Jesus is not interested, I don't think, if I can speak for Jesus for a minute, I don't think Jesus is interested in being your genie that you go to when you're in a bind. He wants to be your master, the one who runs your life, your leader, the top priority in your life. The only way, he says, this discipleship thing will work is if he becomes that top priority. And so the second question, which may be harder, is what's in competition with Jesus in your life? Is it your family? Is it your job? Is it your need for success or achievement? Is it money? Is it the opinions of other people? Is it your addiction to comfort or pleasure or to escape through substances? Or is it just your natural tendency to want to be in charge of your own life? What is it that's in competition with Jesus to be your top priority, your master? Jesus was so serious about the need for us to make him the top priority, to enter into an all-in relationship of discipleship. He was so serious about it that he trotted out language that I think was probably hard for him to use. With all the times he told us to love each other and how important it was that we be characterized above all by love, he trotted out this language of hatred to drive home this point that we can't be divided, that we can't have two loyalties and serve two masters. This is really important for us. In a minute, I'm going to invite the band to come up and lead us in one final song, and it can be just a time to respond and to allow maybe to put into words this invitation of Jesus that's both easy and hard. For now, I just want to close our eyes and let's just reflect on where we are with this. What is it that we need to say goodbye to, whether it's a load we've been carrying that God never intended us to carry, or whether it's another master we've been serving that's interfering with our discipleship? There's no magical thing you have to go through. Repentance is just a matter of saying, okay, in this moment, God, I commit myself to changing. I'm sorry. I've been serving other masters. I've been carrying loads that aren't yours. I put them down, and I renew my commitment to follow you alone. Let's pray. God, each of us here is in a different place. Each of us is called into a unique, individual journey of discipleship with you. And for every one of us, it's going to involve saying goodbye to things that just aren't helpful to keep dragging on into the future. And for every one of us, it's going to involve doing our best day by day to make you our leader, to make you our rabbi, 24/7. We sure do need your help with that. We couldn't possibly hope to succeed apart from your Spirit working in us, creating us into the people that you have in mind for us. May we be cooperative. And as we sing this last song, God, may you meet us in this moment.